Hi all, welcome to Module 5. This week we're talking about emotion. Emotion and conflict, right? So emotion is a key part of the conflict experience. And the readings this week give a few different perspectives on how to understand and deal with conflicts, deal with emotions during a conflict. But before we get started, just take a minute and think about when you're in conflict, how do you feel? How do you feel emotionally and how do you feel in your body? Sometimes emotions are really strong and powerful during a conflict, and this can be really useful. It can also really make it hard for people to engage in conflict in a constructive way, right? So it's really important that we think through aspects of emotion and figure out strategies for working with our own emotions and acknowledging and recognizing the emotions of other people in conflict and being kind of patient with ourselves as we're doing this kind of conflict management. So in this video, I'm going to talk about sort of three different approaches or three different things to think about with emotions and conflict. First is just knowing ourselves, and then there's also understanding others and considering the context. I'm going to talk the most about the first one, though, because it's really the foundation for the others. So it's important to reflect on our own emotional experiences because it helps us have a window into emotion and conflict and the role that emotion plays. So one aspect of emotion are feelings, right? Just the raw feeling of emotion. During a conflict, we might feel angry or afraid. We might feel sad. We might even feel excited, right? Or we're like, "Urgh!" So we think about what does this feel like? Sometimes these emotions are overwhelming and we can feel physical changes in our bodies. We might feel hot, our faces flush, our body might stiffen up. We might have a surge of energy, or we might just be shrinking away, right? So when you're in a conflict, how are you feeling? It's useful to put a label on that, name that feeling, consider what it is. Anger, sadness, frustration, anxiety, shame. What's going on? What's going on for you when you're in a conflict? This means you don't have to spend hours analyzing your feelings, right? But be reflective and mindful enough, pay enough attention, you acknowledge you're having feelings, and you make sense of those feelings and kind of figure out what they are. This is an important first step to help you get some perspective. Once you recognize what you're feeling, it can even actually be useful to say out loud, right? I'm feeling really angry right now. Or, I'm really feeling overwhelmed and sad or stressed out. Or this thing that's happening right now, it makes me really upset, right? Even if you're just thinking upsetness, but giving it a name can be very helpful. So the second, in addition to feelings, there's also emotional expression. So emotions can be very personal and private. They can simmer, bubbling under the surface for some time. We might kind of keep them inside and try not to show them. Or they might be big and loud, right? Feeling something isn't the same as communicating it verbally and non-verbally. So in addition to thinking about what you're feeling, pay attention to how you usually express emotions. People range on this a whole lot. I know I tend to stiffen up and kind of feel like I have to keep it together. Other friends of mine, they were just right? They're mad and shouting and all this sort of stuff, right? So think about, how do you express emotions? Do you clam up and retreat inward? Do you lash out? Do you say things and then later regret them? Do you wish you'd said things later, right? So it's just important to recognize your own patterns. So ask yourself these questions. When you're in conflict and you feel certain emotions, what do you tend to do? How do others respond? And what tends to happen, right? So anger can lead to aggression, but it doesn't always. Sometimes the feeling of anger leads us to blame ourselves and feel guilty. Sometimes we don't talk about our feelings and instead we hold grudges, which might then be expressed through passive-aggressive statements or blowing up later about something small that isn't really the issue, right? So having some self-knowledge here about what happens for you when you feel these emotions in a conflict situation can help you understand how people might see you, and it can give you a chance to change what you typically do if you want, if you're this isn't working. So recognize your feelings, thinking about how do you usually express those emotions, and then another aspect of this is know your triggers, what sets you off. We all have something, right? Sometimes triggers can be things that are typical in a conflict. I know if I'm in a disagreement, I get really triggered when somebody says something like, "Oh, calm down, you're being so emotional," or they try to talk over me, or talk to me like like they're condescending, like they think I'm not a worthy, equal, valid person with intelligence. Those things make me so mad, and they just trigger me into a way that I don't necessarily want to be. But I know I recognize that about conflicts that I engage in for myself, but they even bother me if I see them happening to other people. Because to me, they're subtle abuses of power. They're used to put others down and be condescending. And it just makes me so angry. I get really fired up about that. But that might not be your trigger. It might be something else, right? Triggers can also be small things that aren't part of a conflict. So maybe it's as small as when like your partner makes a mess in the kitchen after you left it clean, or it's a coworker telling a joke that you think is very offensive, or maybe it's something like bad traffic or technical problems or something that isn't even really about the conflict. Maybe something made us angry at home, and then a small thing at work triggers a conflict with a coworker. So take some time to think about what's really going on for you. It's super important to understand how to move forward. And these can be triggers in the moment or sort of more broad things that you know are really going to irritate. And so the point of developing this awareness is not to be like, aha, now I can win and take it, but just to be mindful about your own experiences. And then in the last part of sort of the self-knowledge that I want to think about is developing strategies to keep yourself safe. Self-knowledge can help you sense when you're in danger, like physical danger or at risk of acting in a way that you'll later regret. Use your self-knowledge to help you think of strategies that can help you feel more calm or safe, ways you can remove yourself from the situation, people you can seek out to mediate conflict if necessary. Sometimes even just taking a second to breathe can be helpful, right? So sometimes it's easier to think about these things when you're not in the middle of a conflict. So if you know that you might freeze up during a conflict because you're so overcome, you're not wanting to, can't kind of cope with it in the moment, it might be useful to write some things down that you want to say ahead of time, or even afterwards and then revisit it. But be thoughtful about your word choice so that when you engage with a person again, you feel more able to express your concerns. Sometimes people want to talk it out with a friend. Or if you know you tend to get loud and express anger in a way you might later regret, it can be useful to practice taking a breath and counting to 3 before you respond. So these specific strategies might not be right for you. These are just some examples of strategies that people use sometimes to help them refocus when they're feeling overwhelmed with emotion. Because emotion can be very powerful and can be used to in ways that are really helpful, right? To help you express things and really show what the weight of the matter is. But it's also sometimes you get overwhelmed. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed, thinking about strategies that can help keep you safe are really useful. Okay, so we've talked about sort of self-knowledge. The other big thing with emotions in conflict is recognizing and responding to other people's emotions. So try to recognize their emotional expressions, their feelings, their triggers, and their patterns. Just like you think about your own, think about what's going on for them. So developing of self-awareness is one thing, but of course conflict's interactional. It's co-created between people. So just like we need to work on understanding ourselves, we also need to develop skills to recognize how other people are feeling. So empathy is huge here. And of course, this is hard when we're wrapped up in our emotional experiences, right? Like if I'm very angry, that takes a lot of my energy. I'm not really working on trying to understand the feelings of the person I'm angry at because I'm busy being angry. But if we want to shift our conflict experience into productive experiences, productive conflict that can transform relationships, bring new ideas forward, and be beneficial, as we've talked about, conflict has the potential to do, then we need to take that step in trying to imagine and understand the perspective and emotions of the other person. Now, if we're in a conflict with someone we have a close relationship to, like a romantic partner, a family member, or a coworker that we've worked with for a while, we probably know what kind of things trigger their anger and how they tend to respond. If we're feeling particularly nasty, we might use those to our advantage in a conflict, but I would encourage you not to do that and instead try to be avoiding those triggers or talk about the triggers, right? If the conflict is with someone we don't know as well, then we need to work harder to be empathic. One thing you can do in a conflict is to acknowledge and validate the other person's feelings. Use active listening, paraphrase what you hear them say, show that you're trying to understand their perspective. Ask questions, is this what you mean? Not as a way to like needle them and win and get your point across, but to really actually try to understand what's at the heart of the matter for them. So understanding, it's not the same as agreeing. Sometimes people worry, oh, if I'm empathic and I show understanding, it means I'm going to lose. I'm going to lose the argument because I've like expressed empathy. No, it's just not true. So showing empathy and understanding, it's the way forward. It offers a starting point for creating new options, for making peace. Other conflict management skills are also really useful, but they start with a sense of empathy and an effort to try to understand. So, we're thoughtful about ourselves. We're working on trying to understand other people. And the last thing is to pay attention to the emotional context. So, I'm going to say, consider things like power, gender, and culture, right? How are these relevant to what's going on for people in the emotion? Cultures have a wide range of different norms about emotional expression, as we talked about in the last module. Gender norms are also really relevant to people's experience of emotions. We tend to believe that certain kinds of people are just inherently emotional and other people are not, right? And that's related to our understandings of gender. So people in conflict can have different emotional responses that are relevant to power. These things matter. So be mindful of those things when you're thinking about what the heck is going on with this conflict. Timing can also make a difference. So is this conflict something that's recurring over and over? Has it been building for a while, or does it seem new and kind of out of the blue? Do the people involved have a history of conflict over different issues? And contexts have different norms for emotional expression, of course. So workplaces have certain expectations about what emotions and values are allowed, and those norms can either promote or inhibit conflict, right? So if we want to understand the emotional side of conflict, we have to take the context seriously. Right? Okay, so that's it for now. It gives you some tools for starting to understand and responding to emotions in conflict. I look forward to reading your reflections, and I'm happy to answer any questions.